Tonight on the All Kinds of Weather forecast, we have a bye-week episode recapping the season thus far, Billy Napier's job situation, and what the Gators got to do the rest of the season to have a successful year in Gainesville. This is the In All Kinds of Weather forecast. And welcome in to another episode of the In All Kinds of Weather forecast. I am your host, Chris Yanes. Joining me again for another episode, Neil Schulman, giving us a preview of what he wants to see the rest of the season. We're going to give our thoughts. Billy Napier, what does he got to do to keep his job now with 5 games remaining in the season? Time is certainly running out there, but certainly time also could be running out on your opportunity to save for your retirement. And that is why the In All Kinds Weather Forecast is proudly sponsored by 401k Generation, the wealth management company that helps you invest today for your future tomorrow. Their team of advisors is committed to providing guidance and education for your 401k plan and its participants. And they also offer a range of enrollment solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your company's 401k plan. Whether it's saving for your child's college, investment advice, or even your retirement, 401k Generation's team of advisors makes getting to know you their top priority. Their advisors will tailor a path to assist you in navigating life's financial milestones and reaching your financial goals. 401k Generation, building stronger futures, one generation at a time. For more information, contact them at 866 998 5879 or visit their website at 401kgeneration.com. Shout out 401k Generation, shout out Eddie Rojas, and shout out Heads and Tails, the official apparel partner of the In All Kinds Weather Forecasts. Are you a passionate Gators fan? Then you need to check out Heads and Tails, South Tampa's ultimate destination for all things Gators. For nearly 30 years, Heads and Tails has been the go-to shop for the Gators merchandise, apparel, and gifts. Whether you're looking for the latest jerseys, stylish hats, or unique memorabilia, we've got you covered. Heads and Tails hand selects only the highest quality styles and brands, ensuring you can truly champion your team with pride. In July 2020, 3 families came together to continue the legacy of Heads and Tails after it was put up for sale. They've proudly carried on this tradition and couldn't have done it without the amazing support from the local community. Your enthusiasm fuels their passion. And here's an exclusive offer for you, our In All Kinds Weather listeners and viewers. Use the code IAKOW30 for 30% off in store or online at theheadsandtails.com. So whether you're gearing up for the next big game, decorating your home with Gator pride, or searching for the perfect gift, Heads and Tails has you covered. Visit them today and experience the excitement of being a Gator fan because Heads and Tails, they believe in celebrating your team every day. So use that code IAKOW30 for 30% off. Neil sporting the Heads and Tails logo with his hat. I'm supporting the reversible swamp head hat that came out this past homecoming. You can get those on their website at theheadsandtails.com. We are certainly very thankful for their partnership. All right. I think some of us are probably thankful here in the heart of Gator Nation that we have a bye week. Gives us a chance to, if you must, hopefully your friends plan those fall weddings around this weekend for you. Apple picking, pumpkin picking, those fall activities, I suppose will give you a pass this weekend. This is your chance to do it because football gears up 5 weeks after that. And so with a bye week, Neil, we got to talk the season thus far. I think we've really ad nauseum talked about our thoughts of it. We're not incredibly thrilled being 4-3 at this stage in the game, but certainly I think the news that continues to come up, the status of Billy Napier. So perception, reality of Billy Napier's situation, in your opinion, at this stage, 7 games into the season.
I'm gonna start the show with a hot take here.
Oh boy.
Um, yeah, going back to what you said about fall weddings, I have a very simple rule about that. If you're inconsiderate enough to have your wedding in the fall, I am going to be inconsiderate enough to not attend.
Well, see, here's the thing. That's not a hot take whatsoever. Uh, However, I will say I do have a dear friend who I'm attending his wedding in Jacksonville on Florida, Georgia. Let me just preface this. He is a dear friend. He's a very close friend. And because it is not a home game, I'm making an exception to the rule here. But so I'll be in Jacksonville for Florida, Georgia weekend, just not at the world's largest
Oh my
outdoor cocktail
God.
party. So yeah, first
Oh,
time since
you
2010 that I'm actually missing the game. I've gone to
poor
14
guy.
I've gone to 13 consecutive Florida Georgias. So this will be breaking the streak for me. But I love my dear brother Chris, so I hope you're listening to the show or watching the show. But
Chris and
love you,
Chris,
buddy.
of course, it would be your namesake to keep you away from that.
Yes.
Um, well, I mean, look, that game does have a bit more luster now. You're missing a bit more sexy of a game than I guess it could have shaped up to be if Florida laid a big fat egg against Kentucky, but they didn't. The Gators needed that win and they got it. The question now is how much did that really help the Gators in terms of keeping their coach around? Because it is pretty clear that all the players love him, which is cool. You know, that counts for something. I don't know how he's been able to keep them together after they did not look at all interested in playing for him the first 3 weeks of the season, but he's done it. So that does matter. The question goes, Chris, do we now lower the very clearly set expectations, not goals, but expectations we had for this season coming into this season, just because he piles up some good results late in the season? And by good results, I don't mean winning out because that is pretty obvious. He's going to be back. If he goes 9-3, there's not really a conversation. He's back.
Yeah.
It goes 8-4, he's back. Do we say the Gators can go 7-5, and we feel he deserves to be back? I think that's a separate conversation too. What will happen and what we think should happen. So I'm going to turn this around, and I want to be the host. I'm going to ask you the question. What do you think?
Well,
Seven and
so
five good enough?
it depends, and this is the exception that I'm going to make. I want to know where our recruiting class is
Well, it's not
because
looking very good right now.
it's not. So that's why I said that because if you're 7-5, that means you had to have beaten one of Georgia, Texas, LSU, or Ole Miss, or two of them. You would have beaten two of them, and I'm going to assume you beat Florida State because if you don't beat this Florida State team, that's a fireable offense, even if you would have finished 8-4.
Right, I
They
agree.
are so bad. Florida State going into this game against Miami, you know what's at stake for them? Bowl eligibility. They
Right.
will be eliminated from bowl eligibility. They are a 3 touchdown underdog on the road. There is no way you could lose to Florida State and keep your job, even if you were to go 8-3 going into that game. So let's just go ahead and write that off now. That's my take of the night. If you go 8-3 into that game and then lose it, you should still be fired at 8-4. Now, to go back to what you asked me, I want to know where Florida's recruiting class is as a 7-5 team. Because does that mean we've gained momentum then in the month of November and into December? We have 6 weeks until early signing day. That's not a lot of time to salvage a class. At this point last year, Florida had a top 10 class and it fell apart. So certainly classes can fall apart this time of year. They can also come together last minute. It does happen, but there aren't a lot of indications that it's going to happen for this Gators team. And we'll talk a little bit about recruiting. We'll get some recruiting news at toward the end of the show, some nugget there. So make sure you're still watching, you're following along. But unless Billy Napier has a top 15 class, or I'll say top 20, top 15 class, I don't see a scenario where you could bring him back at 7-5 because then it's an average season. And yes, he has done something that he has not done yet at Florida, and that is achieve a winning record. But to your point, like we've talked about all year, Neil, 7-5 is not the Gator standard.
Eight
You
and
should
four
have
isn't the
seven,
Gator standard for that matter.
not really, but 7-5 certainly is not. You should have 7 wins going maybe into
Into
the beginning of
Jacksonville.
November,
Yeah.
ideally. So I think if he's going to be 7-5, you've got to show me some hope on the recruiting trail because DJ Lagway is an impressive athlete. He's a great quarterback. But if you're not filling him with future great athletes or guys to take over after DJ Lagway leaves, there is no hope. There is no future for this program.
Or lineman to block for him.
That's also a problem.
Um, oh, I mean, that's one of the positions we lost. Joseph Mbachu, gone.
Yep. Yep.
That's not good. He was anticipated to be one of the cornerstones of the offensive line moving forward after we
Defensive
talked it.
line. Defensive line.
Right, sorry. Yeah, the defensive line. He was expected to be one of the cornerstones of Florida's pass rush, right? Or Florida's run defense that looked good against Kentucky for the most part. Cam Jackson, great game. Awesome. He's gone after this season. Caleb Banks did some nice things. He's gone after this season. You're going to need to reload. So like you said, the recruiting does matter. But I'm going to make it very, very simple. And I'm going to distinguish between what should happen and what I think or what I want to happen. For me, I won't accept anything less than 8-4. And the loss has to be to Texas. It cannot be to anyone else. Because if it's to anyone else, that means you either lose another rivalry game
Mhm.
or you lose another home game. 5 games remaining. Georgia, that's a rivalry game. Texas, which is the road game. LSU at home and a rivalry game. Ole Miss at home and FSU, another rivalry game. The only loss I will accept the rest of the way is to Texas. And it can't be a 40 piece. It has to be a fairly competitive game from start to finish because that is what happens when you get blown out by Miami and Texas A&M and hand a free win over to your rival in Tennessee. Guess what? The expectations are high now. You don't have any margin for error. You don't have the ability to go, well, we fought Georgia tooth and nail for 4 quarters. That flew in 2022. In year one, there's a tweet out there. I can timestamp it and I can put it back at the top of my timeline now. Back then, I lived with my parents in New Jersey. I flew down to Jacksonville for that game, and I said I paid money for flights, for a rental car, I paid for tickets. I paid for food. I took someone out to dinner that night as a thank you for them hosting me. I paid a lot of money to go watch Florida lose that game 42-20. But you know what? It was 28-20 late in the third. I appreciated that. I respected that effort. That's gone now. That's a year one thing. You look for progress and signs of growth and development in year one and to a lesser extent in year two. You need results in year three. So am I asking for a lot in going to Jacksonville and beating Georgia and then beating LSU and Ole Miss and FSU, which should be easy, but all those results, maybe, but that's what happens when I can't curse, but when you poop the bed in your first 3 games. That's what happens. So if Napier does that, I'm perfectly fine with him coming back. Now, what I think will happen is Florida needs to be competitive in its last 5 games. There, no 49-3 type beating against Georgia or Texas. I don't think Texas is really capable of that, but can happen to anyone. And I think Florida needs to obviously beat FSU to take care of the 2 home games that they have in LSU and Ole Miss, which puts them at 7. And then I think he's good. I don't know that 6-6 is enough. I don't.
Yeah.
I think then it becomes a very dicey situation. From this is going to what I've heard from people who know more than me about this. I think 6-6 becomes a very, very frightening situation for Napier, where he or his agent or his camp or someone is gonna have to advocate for him. And I don't think that's going to go over well with the boosters. It might if it's Scott Strickland who overrides the boosters, but that's a whole
Yeah.
different type of nightmare that's worth a different conversation for a different day. But the point is, it's going to then become a power struggle at 6-6 where it gets really ugly. And even if he does come back, he is for sure a dead man walking. Good luck to those ticket salesmen, by the way. Have fun trying to sell those seats next
Yeah.
year.
I don't.
And recruiting. Good luck with that too.
Yeah, I think recruiting is the bigger issue. I honestly, I know you've talked about that. I don't think it's actually going to be an issue for our ticket sales or, I mean, the fact that we've sold out 10 consecutive games all during the Napier era. I don't see that being an issue. I think the issue is okay, do the bigger boosters pull back their dollars and support for NIL efforts, facility efforts, overall athletic department? I think that's kind of where they're looking at. We're getting hit in the belt, and that's where they say, okay, we got to make a move. Because I mean, the reality is, if the top brass of the boosters are ready to move on a coach, they're going to move on a coach. And there was a lot of indications that they were set, ready to go, had everything good and lined up back in mid-September after the Texas A&M loss.
And they're still
So
close, by the way. They for what it's worth, they have their finger on the trigger still now
yeah.
after the
Oh yeah.
Kentucky win,
Oh
heading into
yeah.
Jacksonville. They are still able to pull that trigger in a moment's notice. So don't
For
for by any means think that status has changed.
I think we're at the point now though where this was kind of the last weekend I looked at and said, you know what? This is where he gets fired. Because if they had lost to Kentucky, I do think he would have been fired the next day, if not Monday. Now going through it, I think they're going to let him finish the season at this point. I think he's going to finish the season. being that he has a winning record through 7 games. I don't think you replace him. You don't have a bye week. You're going to be replacing him in a week where you're going to have to take on a top 10 opponent 4 times or 3 times out of five and one top 20 opponent in Ole Miss right now. Who knows where they'll be ranked when we play them toward the end of the season. But I think it's important to discuss the realistic expectations. So we do this every year before the season, Neil. We give our percentage chance to win. So I looked at the ESPN FPI to give us an indicator of potentially what the data is telling us. So what is the data telling us? Florida has a 20.8% chance to beat Georgia. They have an 8.7% chance to beat Texas. Much better opportunity against LSU, a 41.1% chance, a 24.3% chance to beat Ole Miss,
That's low.
and a
Wow.
74.2% chance to beat Florida State. So almost 3 and 4 for us there. So what does that equal to? 1.64 wins. So what that is telling us is that, hey, for those of you that cashed the over on the 4.5 for the Gators of Vegas before the season started, congratulations. Your chances are looking pretty darn good for the rest of the year. The data says that is highly likely. However, not likely we get to a bowl game. 1.64 is basically saying a 50-50, a little better than a 50-50 chance we pull an upset somewhere in those four. I do think it's possible, Neil. I think Florida has not pulled that upset, like a major upset. Like, yes, they were a slight home dog to Kentucky. They were a slight home dog to UCF. I think Vegas has really undervalued Florida probably more so than they've wanted to this year and has probably lost some money in those opportunities. But I do think Florida's going to pull one upset in the season.
Well, they usually do. I mean, Napier was a pretty, not huge, but he was a notable underdog against Utah.
Yep, he did it
He
there.
was a notable underdog against Tennessee a year
Yep.
ago. Florida won both of those games. So the data tells us he will
He's
pull
got one
one.
in him.
The
Yep.
question is that good enough? Is one good enough? Because you'll beat FSU. That's not an upset. That gets you 6 and
He
6.
better
And
beat
there we
FSU.
go with the power struggle again. Then we have the situations of the boosters who probably not even talked about enough. How do I put this? They fight amongst themselves, is what I fear is going to happen. They're going to have a lot of arguments and debates. It's no secret right now to anyone who's on Twitter. Some boosters are more popular than others, right? I think we know what I'm talking about if we're on Twitter. They don't always agree with what every other booster has to say. And then it just becomes a question of who is willing to step up and become the quote unquote foreman of the operation. Like we're talking jury duty, like who steps up and leads the operation to decide whether or not Florida keeps or fires the coach. And I don't think that that's likely to go Billy Napier's way. So I think he needs to get 7 if he wants to be safe. I won't be happy with that, but I will grudgingly accept the fact that he'll be back for another year. So I'll roll my eyes and go, fine, whatever, come back as a lame duck again. Good luck with the exact same schedule next year, by the way, and with your recruiting class. But for him to strictly get himself a fourth season, I think 7 and 5 is the bare minimum. I think it is not what I
Yeah.
want. I want 8 and
Yeah.
4, but
I
I
agree.
think 7 and 5 is the bare minimum.
Yeah, 7 and 5. I think that he'll be back. I do believe that. Whether that's I think we're parsing here our opinion versus reality, and the
Yeah.
reality, and that's really what the perception and the reality of the Napier situation. That was the name of this topic, and really the episode is the perception is we think Napier should be fired pretty much regardless because we just don't see him consistently, and that's been the issue in his tenure, consistently stringing together momentum. He had a real opportunity this month. He had a real opportunity. Beat Mississippi State coming out. He had the bye, beat UCF, and he had Tennessee on the ropes. And if he had just beaten Tennessee, how different the perception right now of the season would be. 5-2 going into this bye week against Georgia. Heck, you'd be 3-1 in SEC play. You technically would be actually in the race for an SEC title game appearance, technically speaking, with
You control
all
your
of
own
the
destiny.
you control your own destiny at that point. Yeah, exactly. So, God, I mean, that Tennessee game is going to sting for a long time. And I think when we look back, especially if we go 6-6, it's going to really sting potentially for Billy Napier himself. So I agree, Neil. I think seven
It'll
and
sting
five.
him until he gets his first paycheck from being fired.
Good point. Yeah, he'll have 25 or 26 reasons to be not too upset
Million
about that
reasons.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think though that the is 7-5, he's back for sure. The administration, the boosters will probably give him another year. And I think the argument then is like, okay, you're going to keep Lagway for sure, most likely keep Lagway,
Yeah.
keep a lot of these guys, younger players who are starting to make a difference in this 4 game stretch where we've seen vast improvement on both the defense and, for the most part, offensive side of the ball outside of the Tennessee game and the play. But that play calling was really the issue there. It wasn't necessarily the personnel themselves. Then I think the question is, can you get the recruiting to come together at the end? Because we'll talk about this now. Florida has lost 3 blue chip recruits in the last week, and pretty big ones. And I think the one that we
Last
haven't
three
really
weeks,
covered
but still.
for the last 3 weeks, Florida lost Joshua Moore, a 4-star receiver, talented receiver out of South Florida. And what made it worse was the fact that we lost him to a in-state rival who beat us earlier in the season. So now we'll have to potentially face him next year, and potentially if we ever compete with Miami in bigger bowl games, as Miami's now starting to really build that pipeline of talent to maintain the success that they're now seeing on the field. That's a huge loss right there. Then, obviously we talked about him earlier, 4-star defensive lineman, Joseph Mbachu. I mean, that's a huge loss for the Gators. I mean, that right there is a situation where we need the depth, like you said, on the defensive line. So and that right there dropped Florida out of the top 50 in its recruiting class. I mean, that's huge. That is huge. And then on the others, back to the defensive side of the ball, Florida lost 4-star safety Demetrius Samuel out of Palm Bay, Florida, a 4-star athlete who reclassified from a 2026 class back to the 2025 class. And he flipped back to the school in the ACC, who isn't necessarily like a powerhouse. We lost him to Syracuse. He was at Syracuse, he flipped to Florida, and then he flipped back to Syracuse. Insult to injury there. You're losing recruits to Syracuse. That is not good. Those are not the guys we need to be losing here to schools like that. Like, I understand Miami because Miami right now is beating Florida on the field, but that a recruit to Syracuse, not great. Mbachu, he's being heavily recruited by a lot of SEC schools, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, also Michigan, USC in the fight there as well. So that's a national profile recruit that we lost, who we actually got in on before he became a 4-star athlete. So we were the ones that did the talent evaluation there, got him to commit, and then we lost him. So
Because the
that
product on
one,
the field is so bad, which is what we
yep,
said was going to happen.
yep. So as it stands, Florida has 12 commits right now. Vernell Brown, legacy still committed. Ben Hanks Jr., legacy still committed. We still have top 100 athlete Jalen Wiggins for the time being, although he did schedule a visit to Notre Dame late in the season. That one, certainly you don't want to be having guys visit other schools. Nashawn Montgomery out of Miami Central, a guy that is also being courted by Miami and other rivals at this time. Waltz Clark out of Tampa, guy that really hasn't taken a lot of visits anywhere else. He has only visited Florida this season, so that is a good sign. Tayshawn Gelsey, probably my favorite recruit in this class, who was not a 4-star athlete when the season started, but now is already a 4-star athlete. A lot of people think he's going to continue to elevate in the rankings. 6'4", 220 guy, kind of a hybrid tight end slash slot receiver. That's a guy that I would really love to keep in this class out of Riverside and Jacksonville, Florida. But he's getting looked at by other schools too now in the SEC. Florida, once again, was in on the talent evaluation there. And now other schools are taking notice now that we're struggling. Last commit I'll highlight out of the recruiting class because I don't want to go too long on this list. Jeremiah McLeod, 3-star athlete out of Leesburg, Georgia, now is visiting Georgia. And there are some people out there predicting that the flip is potentially already on. So Florida's lost 3 commits in the last 3 weeks, and it may not be done from there. I mean, look, we're looking at a situation where we could have single-digit commitments in December. And at that point, what are you selling for the future? Now, yes, Florida is not losing as many scholarship athletes, but we know every single year you really have to be taking about 20 high school athletes, and then you can supplement in the transfer portal. But once again, then you're hedging that those guys are going to come in, jive with the culture, jive with the team, and actually work out. Because as we've seen this year and in years previous, it's not a surefire thing that a transfer is going to come in and provide the output that you need where they're going to play on the field.
And transfer portal really is only meant to patch up holes. You can't
Yep.
build or forget a building into an entire roster. You can't build a position unit with that. Look in Tallahassee if you need proof of that literally anywhere on the field, from quarterback to receiver to cornerback. That's not a reliable method of building a program, because even if you hit on every single take in one portal cycle and you have a great season, let's say FSU made the playoffs last year. Let's say they made it to the national championship game and then they lost. Well, they'd still have the exact same issue they're having this year, because you have to do the talent evaluations all over again, the culture evaluations all over again, hit on enough of them that you can have a dependable product on the field from game 1 to game 8, let alone game 12, and hope that they don't quit. Because I think that's the last thing that's standing with FSU, is they haven't totally quit yet. The defense hasn't totally quit yet. Wait till that happens. It's going to get real ugly. And that's Florida if they rely on the portal as much as FSU has too, because
Mhm.
Florida and FSU are fighting for the same kinds of players. Now, Florida's, I would think, in a better spot to land them right now. They're not in a great spot, but they're in a better spot than FSU is. But if Florida relies on that after this year, because they can only take 8 or 9 kids of the caliber that the Gators are supposed to get into their program out of the high school ranks, and they have to get all the rest of their pieces from the portal, they're in big trouble. Because honestly, I think that the takes in this past cycle have, for the most part, worked out. Jaquez Bridges looks pretty good.
Yep.
Um, I would say that Ace of
Not
Turner
DJ Douglas.
evaluate, well, not him. Not on the defensive line, it looks a little hard. And that one really hurts my heart too, with a defensive line take. He's a friend, but I mean, he hasn't produced. That's just the nicest way of putting it. He hasn't produced for us. And Elijah Badger worked out well on offense, but you can't rely on that. That's the long and short of it. And if Florida is forced to, and you're putting Billy Napier, who's famous for his long, slow evaluation processes, in a situation where he has to get 30 guys or 20 guys even quick, I don't like their chances in 2025.
The one thing I will say, and I just pulled up Florida's depth chart right now, and as it stands, Florida would only be losing 3 starters on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to definitely have to start seeing guys like Tank Hawkins, Aiden Mizell step up in that receiver role, because they're going to lose Elijah Badger. They're going to lose Kim Dike. They're also going to lose Montrell Johnson Jr., but as we saw this week, may not be a problem. Jaden Baugh is that guy. He's going to be the future of this program, tying a freshman record with 5 touchdowns in a single game.
They're going to lose 3 guys that you know of. You don't know who's going to hit the portal.
True.
Trevor
True.
Etienne, ring a bell?
Yep. No, that's
Like,
a good point. There
like
could be
you
guys
don't
on
know
this.
which
Yep.
star is going to be unhappy with Florida's inability to win games, which is exactly why Trevor Etienne left in the first place
Yep.
and want to go to a different school.
Yep. Yep. On the defensive side of the ball, like you mentioned, they're going to lose Cam Jackson. That's a starter. Caleb Banks, I actually just double checked. He actually does have another year of eligibility. He's a redshirt junior, according to the Florida website. So he could have another year. Jack Pyburn is only in his junior year. He could return as well. Our linebacker room, solid. Pup Howard. Shamar James has another year of eligibility. Is he ready to make that jump to the NFL? I'm not so sure. He's a guy that potentially could come back. George Combs Jr. has another year of eligibility. You still have the young Bucks, Miles Graham, Aaron Childs waiting in the wings. Devin Moore, only a junior, probably would need to have put a whole year of health on tape to prove that he could probably be ready for the NFL there. Jason Marshall is the lone guy who we hope he's recovered in time for the Georgia game. We don't know the extent of that injury at the time of this recording, but that is a guy that's definitely leaving. So looking at the depth, Florida would return a lot of pieces next year. Once again, this is still a very young team. We're seeing a lot of the younger guys contribute. But I think the problem this year, if we don't take a class of 20 to 30 guys like we have in recent years, Neil, is let's fast forward 2 to 3 years from now, or even 1 year from then. When you don't have the depth, you really could see a fall like we've seen with FSU. Even look what during the Dan Mullen years when Dan Mullen didn't adequately recruit and he filled his coffers, his top 10 classes with athletes that didn't make it into school. 2021 came calling and he lost all of the good athletes he had been left over from the Jim McElwain years. It was pretty ugly. It was not a good transition. And that ultimately was his fall from grace at the University of Florida.
Not even a top five pick at quarterback could save him, in part
Yep.
because he refused to play him as much as he should have.
True.
But nonetheless, that level of talent couldn't even save him, which is sad because like we saw, and this kind of does tie us back into Napier too. We saw the downfall of Dan Mullen happening well before the head of the train met the tree trunk. Like we saw that coming a mile away. It's a very different path that Billy Napier's downfall appears to be taking. It's not officially over. I think it's trending that way even after the Kentucky win. But I think that we can still see it happening in slow motion. And I go back, Chris, to South Carolina of 22 when Florida wins the game 38-6, and it's great, but you have so many special teams issues happen in that game. The fake punt for a touchdown, the long punt return, you muff a kick, you get a field goal blocked, you can't even get the hold down for another one, and you have all those face mask penalty on special teams. You have everything that can possibly go wrong go wrong. I scream on this show, you better hire a special teams coach next year. The very next week, we lose a game because of it to Vanderbilt, just because Jason Marshall fumbles a punt in his own end zone. He didn't do a damn thing about it. Not that offseason, not the offseason after it, nor did he do a damn thing to hire a real offensive coordinator, a real play caller who can expand the offense, do more things with it, and now here we are. We're 4-3. There's no sympathy for the Gators' shortcomings anymore because he refused again and again to address the things that we all knew he needed to address. And now it is starting to rub off on one of the things that was a strength of his, recruiting, because recruits see the same
Yep.
things we do. Their parents see the same things we do. Their high school coaches see the same things that we see. Why would you objectively, if you're a high school coach, why would you tell your athlete to come to Florida right now? If you take the Gator fandom out of it, it is a hard sell to tell someone, "Hey, go play for Billy Napier at Florida." What are you going to sell? His 15-17 overall record, his 1-9 record against rivals, the fact that Florida is still very, very likely to have three losing seasons in a row under Napier and four overall. Like, what's the selling point right now? How can
Mhm.
you possibly recruit if you're Billy Napier? It's a miracle that this team hasn't just flat out quit on him yet.
Yeah.
Like,
I
where's
think
the
that
future?
that is a testament to the character and the person that he is. I think if you didn't like a coach, you would quit on him by this point. These guys have not. So I do applaud the fact that they have not quit on him thus far. You did touch on one thing though that I want to say, and I think this would be kind of a good way to kind of get to wrapping up this show. And this was something my wife and I were talking about the other night at the dinner table. Is like, what is a stipulation if he stayed that the administration should make with him? And she said he has to hire a real play caller, like a real OC, a real play caller. Yes, it could be too little too late, but if he does come back, I do believe that is one stipulation I could see the administration forcing his hand into saying, listen, you can keep your job another year, but you got to hire a real OC. You've got too much on your plate. Clearly, it's hurting your ability to make in-game decisions that are best for the team. You got to hire an OC and a play caller that's maybe not call a jet sweep on a 4th and 1 when you have a 240-pound quarterback that can just barrel the line over. So that's something that I do see potentially happening if the administration, the boosters give him another year, is they're going to put some stipulations on staff changes at certain positions, adjustments in the personnel. I do believe that that is something they can force his hand on, and we've seen that that's not uncommon. That happens all over. It doesn't always work out. It still may result in the fact that he's fired a year later and he's a lame duck coach. But I do believe that we are going to see massive staff changes this offseason at key positions like play calling.
The problem with that is that's a box. That is just a plain box that needs to be checked off. Hire an offensive coordinator who can think 92% similarly to me, like let's say a Jeff Scott in theory. Well, you didn't do anything to change the offense for the better. You just hired another version of
Yeah,
yourself.
you want to go
That
hire an
doesn't fix
innovative
anything.
mind like let's throw a name out there. Gator fans might recognize the last name, Cade Bell, the Pitt offensive
He
coordinator.
won't do it.
Right, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know. I
That's
know.
the kind of thing we're looking for that we would want to see some changes so that you're going to
It's
go out and hire an innovative guy.
It's too inventive. He doesn't, and that's the other thing too. Billy Napier was fired from Clemson for running this exact same offense 15 years ago. This offense that he runs was antiquated in 2010. It's 2024 now. Like the amount of change that Billy Napier is going to have to orchestrate, not only be okay with, not only be forced to make, but forced to engineer on his own is so wild. It's so drastic. I just don't, I genuinely don't understand how he's capable of doing it. Like, I don't see a world in which Billy Napier is okay with these changes happening. So maybe he does hire an offensive coordinator, but then we might get a situation where either it's someone who thinks exactly like him and runs the exact same antiquated offense that he ran that got himself fired 15 years ago as an offensive coordinator, or it's someone who is inventive and is creative and can make great things happen, but Billy Napier can't get out of his own way. And he puts his hands in there and he mucks it all up. And we're in the exact same situation a year from now, 4-3, a few embarrassing losses, maybe another game where special teams just hands the game away again, or another bad play call hands the game away again. And well, we tried something different and it didn't work. No, you didn't, though. That's the problem. I don't think a leopard can change its stripes. I don't think Billy Napier's ever going to change who he is. That's why I don't think this is ever going to work out. But we'll see.
Yep, we will see indeed. And certainly Napier, after this bye week here, is going to have his opportunity to coach himself into another year at the University of Florida. He's going to have to do it by beating potentially one or two top 10 teams to get there. So we'll be previewing it here on this show. We'll be bringing you lots of great content. So make sure you're following us on all the socials you see down below: Instagram, X, Twitter, whatever you guys like to call it, Facebook, and hit that subscribe button down below here. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a like button, leave your comment. What does Billy Napier have to do to remain the Florida head coach? Or are you out on him and you're already looking for the next head coach? Let us know down below. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you're listening on audio format, please rate and review the show. Leave us a 5-star review. It helps us bring more great content. And that hat that Neil's donning, Heads and Tails, our official apparel provider for the In All Kinds weather forecast. Go to theheadsandtails.com, shop online or in store here in Tampa, Florida, using the code IAKOW30 for 30% off on your purchase. We thank you all once again for tuning in to another episode of the In All Kinds weather forecast. Signing off of another great episode.